Hello everyone, my name is Charlene Cheney, I'm from Curtin. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge Healthway and Curtin University who've supported the study I'm about to talk about. So, the aim was to use an iterative approach and to engage the end users to develop a digital and a tailored weight loss intervention. So the objectives there. So the evidence is suggesting that when we develop an intervention, it's really important that we include the people who we want to use the intervention so that we can test the intervention features. Is it engaging? Is it usable? And is it acceptable to the population that we want to reach? And in addition, we wanted to explore some of the specific barriers to the behaviours that we're trying to change. Okay, so what exactly is a tailored intervention? Well, what it means is that the information we provide is specific to that individual because it's based on an assessment of their particular behaviour. So we might have a campaign, for example, that encourages people not to have soft drinks, but some people don't drink soft drinks. They see the information and they might ignore all of it, whereas actually some of the underlying messages may still be relevant to them. So we can reward them for the behaviours that they're doing well, but we can also acknowledge areas that need to be improved. In this particular study, I'll give you a bit of background to the study before I tell you how we developed it. So in this particular study, we're using a mobile food record as that tool to assess dietary behaviour. LiveLi today is the name of the intervention that we're using to do the tailoring, so people will receive personalised feedback either as an email or as specific content on LiveLi. So the evidence suggests that if you send someone information that says, eat more veg, for example, they're more likely to take on that information if you said, hello Charlene, from your mobile food record, it looks like you only consume 2 serves of vegetable a day. Did you know that the recommendations say you should eat 5? You're almost halfway. You might like this information on LiveLi about eating more vegetables. So in a nutshell, that's what the intervention is aiming to do, and the evidence suggests that it makes the information we already have more effective. So I'll just explain how the mobile food record works. We assess diet by using an app on people's mobile phone. So when you click on before eating, it activates the camera on your mobile phone. You take a snapshot of what you've eaten, and then after eating, you can click you ate it all, that there's no waste, or you can click after eating and take an image of any food or beverages that are left over. The app automatically sends the image, the time, and the date to our server for assessment by the dietitian, which most likely be me, and there's an example of how it works with the banana. So the framework we're using to change this behaviour is a Susan Mickey combi model, and if we want to change behaviour, really trying to understand the science of how we change behaviour, and this model gives us 3 main elements. So if the behaviour we want to change is to avoid or limit energy-dense, nutrient-poor food, we need to consider whether people are capable. So do people understand what an energy-dense, nutrient-poor food is? For example, junk food. And from our research, people are not convinced that a meat pie or a sausage roll, for example, would come into that category. So we're really looking at the capability. Without that knowledge, are people capable of changing that behaviour? And next, we're looking at that motivation. And really, we're breaking that down into constructs of beliefs, habits, and any desires or plans to change their behaviour, and opportunities. So is there an alternative available? How does that compare in terms of the price, the flavour, and whether it's seen to be socially acceptable among their peers? Okay, so what do? We engage the end users. So this intervention is designed to support people who are already using the LiveLi, who already signed up to LiveLi in Western Australia. So we recruited existing members of LiveLi in WA. We wanted to capture a broad range of people. So we had 148 people with an online panel. We conducted 6 telephone interviews. We conducted 6 focus groups with an average of about 5 to 6 people per group. And we've got 2 consumer representatives. So these are 2 members who sit on our side of the research, informing the design, the development, and the way that we conduct the research. So in total, we had 56 users and 16 health professionals. And what we found when we engaged the existing LiveLi members was that the demographics didn't quite meet what we were hoping for. So there's about 85% female membership, so we needed to have additional recruitment methods to get a balance of male and females. And we found that the weight prevalence was already reflective of the general population. So this slide gives you a bit of an idea as to what we did within our groups, and we were able to replicate this in online and in telephone interviews, or I'd email the images beforehand. So we might show somebody an image and say, we explain what the study is, and we're asking, what feedback would you give to this person to help them lose weight? And we let the group discuss. Very, very interesting transcripts, I can tell you. So when we showed a typical image of what somebody was, of what most people would agree is junk food, there was very little discrepancy. Don't eat it, don't go there, it's not good for you, it's best to avoid it. Although people acknowledge that at some point you're probably likely to eat it anyway, it's very clear that that was the message that should be given. So then we showed this image. So there's a roast dinner, veggies, potatoes, gravy, meat, and 6 beers. And we've said, a man sends us this image, and this is what he's consumed. What feedback should we give this person to lose weight? And surprisingly, the results, a lot of people said things like, well, it depends. Is it a man? Is it a woman? It depends if he's watching sports, because if you're at the cricket, you're at the football, then that's not too bad, really, if it's spread over an afternoon. And so this really opened us to the diversity in people's attitudes and belief, and which is a real advantage of using an iterative approach, because we could change who we then interview next, and we can change what we ask the next group based on what we're learning as we go along. So this image in particular ended up being used in a whole range of groups because it created such diversity. There was lots of controversy about the 3 potatoes. So lots of people were concerned that there were too many carbohydrates. People were not aware that you don't need that much carbohydrates at a meal. Very few people picked up the large serving of meat. There was a group of women that were particularly concerned about the gravy, and that people aren't aware of how many calories are in the gravy. Whereas as a dietitian, I'm looking at the 6 beers and thinking the calories there would be the first, not just the calories, but also the risk of alcohol would be the first concern people have, but not quite the case. So I'm going to express the results in terms of the 3 aspects of behaviour that I mentioned earlier. So in terms of capability, what we've really found is a lack of lots of misinformation, lots of confusion about what would constitute healthy eating and what types of dietary changes would facilitate weight loss and what types of foods we might need to avoid in order to reduce our consumption of energy-dense, nutrient-poor food. When we're talking to the public, we use the term junk food, but people really had quite a narrow perception of what that meant and found it very difficult to see past the typical fast food, chocolate, soft drinks. I'll let you read the quotes. When it came to motivation, this was the participants agreed that this would really be challenging, and I think some of them actually felt really sorry for me. The last one there saying, I don't know, there's nothing you can do, is really almost helpless, that the environment that we're in and the expectation from society and the social settings we're in required that we consume alcohol and junk food. And so some of them were talking, this is interesting, so the first part of the conversation, they'd be giving lots of advice about what we should do. So they'll say things like, to avoid alcohol, you should try have a soft drink in between every other drink, maybe don't drink at all. And then when we gave them an example of a real life person and said, could you give them this information? They said, I mean, you could, but they're not going to do it. It's not going to work. It wouldn't change. So this really gave us a sense of the almost helplessness that some of our participants felt in terms of how likely it is that these behaviours are likely to change. And although they're not talking about themselves, they're talking about this hypothetical person who sent us this image, it gives us some insight into how confident people are that these changes are possible. And opportunity is where we really saw some of the potential in terms of how we can adapt our intervention. So initially when we talked about providing feedback, there was lots of discussions about providing an alternative. So people would say things like, there's no point saying don't eat that unless you're going to give them a healthier option that they can select. So because we've got an iterative process, in the next group we changed the message to say, instead of having this, could you try having this? And then they said, well, no, that's not possible. I remember one person saying, where I eat out, you can't get your chicken grilled. It comes fried with chips, and that's it. They don't sell grilled chicken with a baked potato, so there's no point suggesting that people buy that. The example here is of the sausage sizzle. That's all they sell. Sausage, white bread and onions. So there isn't an alternative, and so giving people the healthier option, they didn't see that as always being viable. So this just shows how the process works. We listened to what people had to say, we took that back to our drawing board, took that back to our literature review about what we'd planned to do, and then went back to another group, shared it, and then listened. So it really was a challenge between reviewing the literature and identifying what the evidence said would be best practice, taking that to participants, and sometimes that led us to a different direction. We thought, okay, well, maybe we need to go back to the drawing board again, look at the design, look at how we're presenting the evidence, how does that evidence translate into an intervention feature? Because if it's not acceptable and usable by the public, then it's not going to work in the real world. It may work in a controlled study setting, but we want it to be able to be transferable. So this process was really useful in that, and I'll give you an example of how the intervention evolved with this process. So this is an example of tailored feedback. So the evidence around tailoring suggests that it happens on a number of levels. So the first level is that you use the person's name so that everybody realises that this message is specifically for me. It uses my name, identifies me. You provide the person with feedback about their behaviour. So you tell them what they've consumed or whatever behaviour it is that you're assessing. You give them feedback on that assessment. And the next step is that you then provide a comparator for that assessment. So you can compare them to other people in their age group. You can compare them to the dietary guidelines in this case as to what is recommended. And then you can provide them with additional suggestions or strategies to improve that behaviour. And you might provide them with content and you let them know that content is selected just for them. So in terms of the science of behaviour change, this feedback I thought was pretty good. When we spoke to our participants, they said it was boring, there's too many words, I wouldn't read it. So that led us back to our design. And one particular participant said, you need to put an image of the food in there. I want to see the images that I've sent you. I want to know exactly what image you're talking about. So he put something together like this. And so participants felt that this was quite appropriate because there's still takeaway and people refer to being in a food court. So you've got the decisions of these two options and you could go for the left or the right, but we know that the person already eats the option on the right because they've sent us, it's your left. We know that people already eat this food because they've sent us an image, and so we could encourage them to eat one or the other. And so the next group we showed this to said, that's good, but I actually want to know how many serves of junk food are in each of these. It would really help. So then that's what we've done. We've added their image with the serves of junk food, and the text that we're providing is still there, but it's broken up in between these images. And we found that that's a more palatable way to transfer the information to the participants while maintaining the integrity of what the behavioural science says we should do in terms of tailoring the message to the individual. So in conclusion, there's a huge amount of misinformation and high levels of confusion, particularly around the types of behaviour change that may contribute to weight management or weight loss, and around what's considered to be energy-dense, nutrient-poor food or drink. And we feel that an intervention to address this really needs to be targeted. So there's definitely a lot of confusion around carbohydrate groups. So the potatoes, the rice are definitely an area of concern, more so than some of the other areas that, as health professionals, we're more concerned about, such as soft drinks and alcohol. A person-centred approach gave us insights that we'd never be able to get from any other scientific or research method. So it's really important to make sure that the user's involved, and through engaging the consumers, I personally think it's now an ethical responsibility we have to make sure that the taxpayers and the public who the intervention is for can have a say and can be involved in how the research money is being spent and how the research is being conducted. So the Live Lighter Today trial is currently being evaluated, and so we're recruiting participants at the moment. So I'd like to acknowledge, I'd like to acknowledge the team who developed the app, Live Lighter, and who work with us, and the funding from Healthway. Thank you.